All right, welcome back to the Wallace Branch, and we are looking at Adair Jr., who's coming onto the map from the Idaho side, just passed over the St. Paul Pass, and heading towards Saltese and then Haugan with the Milwaukee local. I don't know if that's really the correct term for it, because I think the Milwaukee generally didn't run that many locals. They ran more long trains, but for the purposes here, we're going to be treating this as a local, and essentially the main purpose of this train is to pick up some cars at Haugan and then drop off some cabooses at Haugan so that some of the Milwaukee power that's in Haugan and DeBorgia, it's currently sort of stuck. It only handles things inside those towns because I made the rule, arbitrary rule, that we need a caboose for every voyage between any cities except for the closest ones where it's basically the outskirts of another town, which here we don't have too many of those, so we're going to need cabooses in order for those Milwaukee units in Haugan and DeBorgia to do any switching between the two little towns. So that's Adair, and Adair is going to fit in here very nicely because we have the NP local coming from the other side of Lookout Pass, and we'll probably be hearing the hotbox detectors going from time to time because that will be making steady progress, and in the meantime we'll obviously be trying to handle a few more tasks along the way. Alright, Tasha Yar is another person we'll be following. Not much for Tasha to do here, and it's going to be interesting to see how she handles the situation, whether she actually makes it through. I keep thinking, and I keep forgetting, that I need to actually add a track mark beyond the multi-industry, which is loading while moving, so that the train would actually continue on through. And I may do that. So let's stay tuned. But in the meantime, I don't think we need to stick with Tasha as this train slowly inches through the smelter and most likely stops before unloading all those cars. Instead, I think what we're going to do is actually go grab Jessica Rabbit. Make sure Jessica is going in the correct direction. We're not going to spend that much time here at the smelter because the priority is clearly more on the Wallace and Lookout Pass and Montana sides of this route. However, while we're waiting for that Northern Pacific local to cross the pass, I think we can handle a couple tasks. But we'll definitely revert over to the other side as soon as that Milwaukee train arrives at Haugan and as soon as the NP local arrives at Haugan. So yeah, what can we do with Jessica? Well, not that much right now. We're just going to pick up a couple boxcars, and because Jessica is here, we might as well make use of her. And the idea here is really to start with this task, which has been kind of outstanding for quite some time, which is to deliver some boxcars up to the zinc plant, which is a component of the smelter, but up the valley a bit. And there's only 2 boxcars here, so we're not going to be able to get too many done. But there's 17 total that we need to get filled. But on the other hand, it's such a steep grade, every little bit counts, because you can never imagine taking up a whole 17 cars at once. We're just going to put her on autopilot here. Navigate to zinc. Okay. The advantage of a very short train is we don't need to worry about which side of the train Jessica is actually on. Okay, Jessica Rabbit actually seems to have stopped just short of where we need to go. Not too many ore cars to unload here. And I may have even marked this task as completed in my last week's overview spreadsheet. Strange how sometimes the cars empty almost instantaneously, and then sometimes not so much. Eagle says, I see you got the stream to work at 1080p again. Did you do any changes in OBS? I did not do any changes. Okay, that's unloading, so Tasha is done. Okay, Hank Williams in Mullen. And make sure Hank is going in the correct direction. As you can see, Hank just has to switch out some cars to make this train a little bit more complete, and I think all these are empty. That is correct. Actually, we want to leave the caboose first. Yes, let's leave the caboose, grab these two cars. Now, looking at the different demands on the map, we do have some other uses for boxcars. So unfortunately, we're going to have to bring some more boxcars in. The two here, plus the two that are going up to the smelter, that'll be helpful, but it's not enough. And yes, now we have a bunch of reefers in the middle. It's not so perfect. Sorry, we have a bunch of boxcars in the middle of the train, as opposed to reefers on both sides. Yeah, I don't think it's a big problem, though. With the caboose on the end, you can never just leave cars at a track as you're pulling past the pulling past the destination. You always have to do a couple movements to take the caboose off, set out the cars, etc. Doesn't mean blocking the train has no use, obviously, but it does reduce the value of doing that in this instance, I think. I believe shortly we should be hearing the sound of the hot box detector of the NP local reaching the top of Lookout Pass. We've been going for about 10 minutes, so just depends on how fast that is progressing, I guess. Setting aside the cabooses, and then picking up the reefers, and then connecting the cabooses, and then on to Wallace. Now, since I make these videos for posterity, for all time, I sometimes hesitate to talk about things that are going on currently, including the release of SP6, which caused a number of trouble, and then I believe yesterday, the release of a hotfix that seemingly resolved at least some of those troubles, although I think N3V specified that the only things the hotfix attempts to address are splines and then the memory utilization issue. So I think that there were some other issues as well. I'm not sure. And I'm very closely monitoring that discussion. SP6 was marketed not only as enabling this new type of tree asset from Plant Factory, but more importantly, to my mind, an improvement in performance. And I don't think there's too much evidence so far that anybody is experiencing performance improvement. Mostly people have been talking about less performance, or at best, recovering the performance that they used to have with SP5. And this is a particular concern for me because I have so many trees on the Wallace Branch. The Wallace Branch, in addition, being an HD route, is pretty heavy performance-wise. And I don't just want to make sure that it can perform in situations like what we're doing on camera, but I also want to make sure that when we get those long vistas, it performs at least as well as the current SP5 that I'm on. And I do believe I have the render distance as long as it can possibly get. And I still have some situations where I can't see those distant speed trees. But I'm satisfied with the current draw distance. And if that draw distance is substantially reduced, then I think it would definitely affect how things would look on this route. And not just at those very obvious scenic points like Lookout Pass, but also in places like Wallace or just going along the valley and near Kellogg, because those places also you can see quite a long distance of trees. Okay, there is Hank Williams on his way to Wallace. All right, so here is our Northern Pacific local ascending Lookout Pass, and we are almost to the pass. And you can see in the background kind of what I was talking about with the trees being rendered all the way into the distance. And of course I have a little bit of a haze effect, so you can't quite tell that they're not rendered all the way to the horizon, but they are rendered pretty far away, all the way back to Mullen, definitely. And I think that that's what makes this pass look particularly interesting for me, is that long view. I mean, it's called Lookout Pass for a reason. So I definitely want to make sure that that continues to be the case, and that there's not a lot of popping of the LODs. I don't think that that's going to be resolved. I don't think the N3V considers that popping to be a bad problem, but you don't notice any LOD transitions for these particular trees that I'm using, whereas what I've seen on both Derail Valley and on the beta testers of the Plant Factory trees, a lot of popping. Just there I did see some change, but it was nothing that I would be conscious of unless I was specifically looking for it. Okay, but we still have a ways to go with this local. Crossing over the vertical curve at Lookout and moving from a 4% upgrade to a 4% downgrade. All right, now Adair speeding along at 40 miles per hour, also with some nice vistas, albeit not quite as scenic and not quite as far-seeing, but still you can see quite a distance, and you can see those trees all the way up to Lookout Pass there in the background. So yeah. And Thomas Crown is waiting for track clearance. Let's go over and find out what that's all about. But yeah, Adair here is almost to Haugan, so we'll be coming back shortly. All right, so this little Thomas Crown is just going to NP Yard Track 1. And essentially there's only one thing that I want Thomas Crown to actually do, which is to help out with the task of moving some ore cars up to Burke. I think I did not actually want to decouple. I think I want to continue forward here. Now, I believe Burke needs on the order of 17 ore cars, which is about a little bit more than half of this string, perhaps. But we really should get on the back end. The locomotive should be on the back end of the string of ore cars, because that's also a 4% grade, and that's a safety measure. Eagle says, N3V doesn't care about LODs popping, but I do a lot. Yeah, I do care as well. And, you know, based on what I saw, commentary from Zek, he mentioned that, you know, you wouldn't notice some of these LOD changes from the cab view. And of course, some players play only from the cab view. And so when I'm playing Derail Valley, where it's almost all cab view, the way I play at least, then it's true. Even though there is considerable popping of LODs in Derail Valley, you hardly notice it from cab view because you're focused on the near distances. But as you can tell, that is not the way I play this game at all. And I can't kind of imagine that, given that the game was kind of created around a more of a model railroading perspective of the world, it doesn't really make sense to me that it wouldn't be made to look good both from the cab and from high elevation. All right, there are 29 cars. Yeah, and we do need 17 ore cars. Now, to do the runaround, where would be the most efficient way? I don't think that this little segment here would work. It's too short. But let's have a look at that train. And let's also see how much the train weighs. Yeah, 300 tons. So this is no problem for Thomas to handle going uphill, but Thomas cannot handle it going downhill. So my proposal is very simple, which is that Thomas will go uphill, Thomas will load the train, and then Thomas will go downhill with the amount of cars that Thomas can handle. Thomas Crown, I should say. You know, this is not the track I wanted to go on, but oh well. It will be fine. Let's check to see where Adair has gotten to. Ooh, Adair is very close to Haugan. This task we're watching on screen is clearly a lower priority than Adair. There's the chalet-style Wallace depot. Watching the raison d'etre pass by, although I guess these are empty hoppers, so the raison d'etre would be the ore, not the hoppers. Okay, let's stop the train, decouple. Blocking traffic, obviously, as one does. Of course, all the traffic would mostly be going to the depot itself. There's not a lot up that road. I believe there is a little town named Sunset, perhaps? Now we've got UP train coming in. Why don't we stop this UP train? The train is already stopped, that's fine. Then we can... What is going on? Okay. Shall we just run this switch? It's weird. Oh, there we go. I think it was AI, the UP train that was controlling that switch, but I'm not 100% sure. Quickly check up on Adair again. Adair is just arriving at Haugan. I think we have time to couple up here and then go over to Adair. Now, if you've been following this series, you know that I've been working on cab interiors. It's been my major project for the last 3 months. And I'm happy to report that all 6 of the cab interiors that I've been working on, I now have the meshes and textures, at least a first effort, complete. Well, more than a first effort. I'm pretty much satisfied. Okay, let's send this off to Burke. Navigate to Hecla. Lead. Yes, I'm pretty much satisfied with the initial effort, and now the challenge is to maybe make them a little bit better, improve the textures here and there around the margins, not too heavy lifting, and then add a few animations, a few sounds to make them a little bit more interesting. However, I have not managed to get them all applied to my locomotive, so that's why you're not seeing me jump into the cabs here. Those cab interiors have not yet been applied to the Milwaukee, for example, or to the Northern Pacific. I just had one test locomotive for each, with the exception of the SW1200, but then I found some small mistakes, so I'm still working on that one again. So that's why you're not seeing it in action today. But hopefully next week you will be able to see some more of those cabs in action, including on the next episode of the Pennsylvania Burwind, because the most recent one that I completed was the RS11, Alco RS11. One of the challenges is with cabs that getting the attachment points correct so that the cab location appears the correct height relative to the scenery and everything. That's a little bit tedious to deal with because you have to go back and forth between the camera location and the location of the attachment point and the locomotive mesh and the center of the cab interior mesh. This is the Toomey Little Joe, and it's one of the few locomotives on this route that I did not create a version of, and I have debated whether to put that on my list, but so far it's not on the list. And the cab is also quite basic. So it's not just the exterior is a little bit basic, not with PPR textures, and colors are a little bit flat. But yeah, I need to finish some of the projects I'm working on. I'm sure like many people out there, I sometimes start projects and don't finish them, or at least I don't finish them in the correct order. Jumping around too much, just like I'm jumping around when I play this route. Alright, let's check and see where our NP local has gotten to. I'm assuming everything is fine. Oh, it's a dangerous assumption. It looks like if things are not fine, we had better go up there. Alright, the NP local is now underway again after stopping at Lookout moments after we looked at it last. And the reason it stopped is just that the autopilot was only set to drive to Lookout. So, user error. Although I don't feel too bad about that because if you remember the last episode, I was having a little trouble getting it moving. So I didn't actually bother programming it all the way. Yeah, interestingly, we seem to be missing a couple cabooses. We certainly started out with cabooses. Now this is going to be an interesting switching task because we want to give the caboose to these GP9s, wherever the caboose is. But we also want all these freight cars to remain in Haugan for now. Cabooses added back. Essentially, they should have been there all along. I had placed them down. I had not omitted to include them, but they had not been coupled to the train, so they were left up at St. Paul Pass without my realizing it. So that's nothing to do with operations. It's more related to just a foible of the way I put them down. Now I was thinking, where would cabooses have been kept in this very limited yard, which actually 4 tracks might be more than existed in reality. I'm guessing 3 tracks total. My thinking is that they might have been occasionally left on this Y track. Of course, in this instance, we don't really care, because we're just going to be picking them up immediately. A lot of Burlington Northern and a lot of Milwaukee cars on this train. And interestingly, even though Milwaukee and Burlington Northern were competitors, by the period of the 1970s, they were more cooperating than competing. And actually, the Burlington Northern was sending a lot of its long-distance trains over the Milwaukee tracks, and I think even it's possible even the majority of Milwaukee's traffic was BN traffic coming over its path, just because of the BN lacked adequate capacity. And of course, in this area, they were clearly cooperating since they were actually sharing track in this segment. One of the reasons why this is an interesting area for modelers, I would say. Yeah, why don't we just stop you here? There's no need to go any further. We're just dropping this caboose. Oh, why did the train stop? Why did the train stop? I just don't understand. Many of the cars used on this route are my own assets because I wanted to make sure that they all had the correct loads by default. It's much easier when you have your own assets. But because this Milwaukee train is just passing through, that gives you the license to use a lot of other cars that are not from my repertoire. So that's why you're seeing a little bit more variety while still sticking with the Milwaukee and Burlington Northern. I have said that I would like to see a few more longer trains, and it's difficult to do that in the way that I do these industry layouts. This train is reasonably long. Not as long as probably the prototype, but long for this route, undoubtedly. Yes, I did change my mind about that caboose. While we're waiting on the Northern Pacific local, we might as well push the caboose back. Should have done it originally. And then we can take these locomotives and pull them forward. Yeah, sometimes the junction derailment prevention rule is a little bit of a pain when it throws switches. It's too bad that you can't sort of lock them on the fly. I mean, you obviously can lock switches in session rules, but I mean, just in free play like this. And you really should be able to override a locked switch as well. When AI locks a switch and you can't figure out why, it's very frustrating to have to like somehow close the route just to get that problem resolved. Of course, locomotives, to do a power move, I'm not playing that you would have to have a caboose to go from one town to the other. But for this power move, we wouldn't need a caboose, but then coming back with an actual train, we would need a caboose. So that's the issue. Okay, shall we move on to Borgia? Borgia, Maine. All right, Thomas Crown has arrived at the Hecla facility here, but the trick here is going to be to load just 4 cars instead of trying to load this whole train. I think that's going to be a better tactic. And fortunately, there is this side track right there that we can shove these cars into. It's going to be tough, though. It's a heavy grade indeed. We loaded 1 car only, unfortunately. A little Mayflower truck passing the historical marker at Burke. Lead-silver discoveries in 1884 attracted a railroad to Burke by 1887. Hundreds of miners lived there in a canyon so narrow that they scarcely had room for streets. So in 1888, SS Glidden's Tiger Hotel had to be built over rather than beside Canyon Creek. Railroad tracks and Burke's only highway also had to run through this hotel. When a second railroad arrived in 1890, its tracks had to be laid in Burke's only street. No other hotel had 2 railroads, a street, and a stream running through its lobby. Did I not throw that switch? Dang it. Not paying adequate attention. Well-dressed mining executive coming out from that door. Is there a track mark up there? Checking our NP local. I know that we're not even close, though. Speed limit is rather tight in Lookout Pass area. Yes, just coming through the tunnel there at Lookout. The Borax Tunnel. At some point, I'm going to have to do a test to see how long does it precisely take the autopilot to run from Mullen to Salties. And I think sometimes the AI doesn't necessarily follow the speed limit, like it goes considerably slower. Not sure why. All right, let's find out what this ore hopper is called. It's called 44. It might be ideal in a future session to pull those trains in a a downhill direction through that loading track. Then we won't be pushing upwards like we will be here. Let's see whether this is a loading by moving. I think it might not be, but just because I didn't see any messages to that effect. Going through the building just to see what's going on here. Okay. Well, in any case, 4 cars should load, so that's what I'm going to say is going to happen when we come back to Thomas Crown next time. All right, back with Kenny Rogers. And Kenny Rogers, you are going to pick up the lumber cars here in Borgia. And I think for this to work, we really want to pull forward with this train, don't we? This train just wants to be out of the way. Oh, I see there's a bunch of empty flat cars at the end. Lots of cement. Well, there is a cement facility there in Haugan, so it makes sense. Wow, people are cutting it very close. This is a rare case where we have a long string of lumber cars, which I believe were loaded in episode 1 of this operating series. We have a whole string that's going to 3 different destinations, all of which are on the map. So Hunter, especially, right on the other side of Lookout Pass. And also the BHS, not the smelter itself, but the concentrator. And then also to Tiger Mine, sorry. Okay, so now we're just going to pull this out, and I thought, this would be an easy run around here with the siding, but that was before seeing that there's actually 2 cars blocking that path. But no problem, we'll just include them in this short train going up to Haugan.
Detector milepost 104.0. No defects. Total axles 140. Train speed 2 mph. Detector out.
Didn't mean to actually click on that. The Twin Oaks restaurant, cafe, immortalized in the film The Postman Always Rings Twice. Sorry about that slow stop there. Had my hand on the wrong key. It would have been a slow stop no matter what, but it's especially slow. Ah, dang it, I clicked on it again. Well, this way we would definitely check on where it is. Nearly to Taft. Some passing going on the road in the background there. way that cars, traffic is managed on the roads in trains is definitely not ideal. But it's not totally bad. It's probably adequate for most people's needs. All right, now acting as conductor. Toomey's beautiful little Milwaukee switch stands. Run around the train, and then drive back to Haugan NP track 2. Huh, all those actually loaded. I'm baffled. Absolutely baffled. Okay, Thomas Crown, you are going to be on your way back to Wallace with your slightly embarrassing load of just 4 cars, but that's okay. Don't be worried. Gonna go to NP track 4. And yes, running at the rear of the train with the cab facing forward and the caboose right in front of the cab is all a safety measure. It's heavy, heavy grades and heavy, heavy trains coming out of Burke. Alright, that's going to do it for this episode, I'm afraid, and definitely did not get nearly as much done as I thought we would. We did get one task underway, the task that you're seeing on screen right now, but in terms of tasks getting completed, not so good on that score. So, I think part of the reason for that is just that the NP local stopped at Lookout. I promised that I was going to keep a sharp eye on the NP local, and guess I didn't, but anyway. That's the way it happens in trains. Things go slower than you expect. So we'll be back next time in episode 21 to finish up with the NP local and get him started, hopefully going back to Wallace and finishing up all those tasks that he got started on today. Thank you once again for joining, and we'll see you next time on the Wallace Branch.